The city breathes in a rhythm of frantic, shallow gasps. High above the street level, encased in glass and brushed steel, a man sits at a desk that serves as his altar. It is 8:14 a.m. The fluorescent lights hum with a cold, insistent frequency, flickering just enough to stir a subtle, subliminal anxiety. He is a man of industry, a creature of the modern machine, and he is currently engaged in the most hallowed ritual of the age, the pursuit of getting ahead. His fingers dance across a keyboard, constructing emails that he hopes will translate into a promotion, a raise, or perhaps just a modicum of security in an uncertain market. He repeats the same mantras of productivity work: harder, stay later, sacrifice, more, as if these phrases are sacred incantations that will eventually crack open the sky and rain gold upon his desk. He is tired. The fatigue is not merely in his muscles, it is in his marrow. It is a weary, leaden exhaustion that whispers of a life lived in the waiting room of his own existence. Outside his window, the world follows suit. Thousands of commuters descend into the subway, their faces mirrors of his own, drawn, determined, and deeply, achingly convinced that the key to their salvation lies in the next turn of the wheel. They are chasing a horizon that recedes in exact proportion to their speed. They are convinced that if they push hard enough, the universe will finally surrender. But observe the paradox. The harder they push, the more the world pushes back. The more they demand, the more the circumstances seem to contract. It is as if they are shouting into a vast, celestial canyon, expecting to hear the sound of abundance, but receiving only the hollow, mocking echo of their own desperation. They are trying to build a cathedral of joy on a foundation of struggle, unaware that they are speaking to a deaf god of their own construction. They believe they are manifesting, but they are merely grinding gears against a locked gate, mistaking the sound of friction for the sound of progress. To understand why this frantic effort results in silence rather than manifestation, one must descend into the architecture of the subconscious. Most people labor under the false premise that repetition creates reality. They believe that if they say the words, "I am successful, I am wealthy, I am getting that promotion," often enough, the universe will eventually tire of their persistence and yield. This is a misunderstanding of the spiritual mechanism. The universe does not respond to the volume of the noise. It responds to the quality of the resonance. Why does the subconscious mind reject these forced affirmations? The answer lies in the dissonance between the affirmation and the internal ledger. When the conscious mind utters a desire, "I am wealthy," the subconscious immediately conducts an audit. It consults its own archive, the memory of unpaid bills, the history of professional rejection, and the deeply ingrained belief that wealth is a prize reserved for the few. The subconscious is a loyal gatekeeper, and it sees the conscious statement as an imposter. It whispers, "You are a liar," and the effort terminates in a state of inner conflict. How, then, does the mechanism truly function? It functions through alignment. The universe is not a shopkeeper that requires you to haggle for your needs. It is a mirror. It reflects the frequency of your internal state back to you as physical circumstance. When one tries too hard to believe an affirmation, they are signaling a state of lack. To try to believe is to admit that you do not yet believe. It is a confession of absence. The moment you introduce the friction of effort into your manifestation, you move from a state of being into a state of wanting. And because the universe is a law-based system, it can only fulfill the state you reside in. If you reside in the state of wanting, you will forever be supplied with more wanting. To break this cycle, one must bypass the analytical gatekeeper. The error is in the target. Most people focus on the result, the money, the job, the status, which is heavy with the baggage of their past failures. The secret lies in the frequency. True manifestation is not a conquest. It is a recognition of what is already yours by divine right. The failure of traditional affirmation is its dependence on the conscious mind, which is the very part of the self that has been trained to fear, to calculate, and to struggle. To achieve real change, one must move the lever from the head to the heart, from the intellect to the spirit, shifting from the language of I must to the reality of I have. Consider the story of Elias, a master woodworker in a village forgotten by time. Elias possessed a skill that was whispered about in the courts of kings, a talent for carving, not just wood, but the very essence of form. For years, Elias labored under the belief that he had to strike the wood with violence to bend it to his will. He would stand over a block of oak, his brow furrowed, his hands blistered, shouting at the timber as he drove his chisel into the grain. "Be a table," he would command. "Be a chair." The results were tragic. The wood would split, crack, and warp. His work was clumsy, heavy, and lacked the grace of the trees from which it came. Elias was exhausted, his body failing, his livelihood in shambles. He believed that the wood was stubborn, that the universe was conspiring to keep him from his mastery. He grew angry, convinced that his tools were dull or that his materials were cursed. One evening, an old master traveler sat by Elias's shop, watching the man struggle. The traveler did not offer advice. He simply hummed a melody, a soft, resonant vibration that seemed to harmonize with the very walls of the workshop. Elias paused, his chisel hovering in the air. He felt a sudden, inexplicable shift, a release of tension in his shoulders, a softening of his jaw. For the first time, he stopped looking at the wood as an adversary to be conquered. He looked at it as a partner. He touched the grain. He listened to the wood. He realized that the shape was not something he had to force upon the block. It was something that already existed within the wood, waiting for him to reveal it. He stopped trying to make a table and began to invite the table into existence. His strokes became gentle, precise, rhythmic. He was no longer fighting the resistance of the oak. He was flowing with the nature of the grain. By morning, a piece of art stood finished, a masterpiece of such delicate, flowing beauty that it looked as if it had grown from the floorboards. Elias had not spent more effort. He had spent less. He had simply changed his relationship to the material. He stopped being a prisoner of the struggle and became a conduit for the design. The village called it a miracle, but Elias knew the truth. The wood had not changed, he had. The lesson of the woodworker is the lesson of the modern soul. Your life is the block of wood, and your words are the tools. As long as you approach your life with the energy of struggle, you will continue to carve out pieces of frustration and lack. The wonderful decree we are about to explore is the secret rhythm that will align your chisel with the grain of the universe. But before we proceed, there is a requirement for your evolution. You must acknowledge the weight you are currently carrying. Take a moment right now to pause. Look at the boulder you have been pushing. What is the one task or responsibility that currently feels like a burden, the one thing you dread starting today? Write it down, or simply name it in your mind, and acknowledge that your struggle is not a requirement for your success. If you are ready to let go of the grind and step into the architecture of ease, like this message to signal your readiness to stop the struggle. You have spent years believing that you are a servant to the clock and a slave to the scarcity of the world. But that is merely the first layer of the veil. Beneath the struggle lies a kingdom of abundance that has been waiting for you to simply claim the keys. You are not meant to earn your life. You are meant to inhabit it. We have only just begun to touch the surface of this truth. The woodworker discovered his resonance, but he still had to learn the secret of the neutralizer, the specific linguistic code that allows one to bypass the mind's internal guard and speak directly to the infinite builder. In the next chapter, we will dismantle the heavy, jagged words that have been sabotaging your blueprint and replace them with a frequency so light it cannot be denied. The path is opening. The air is thinning. Prepare yourself, for we are about to enter the domain of the 12 words. Imagine a cavernous library, ancient and infinite, where the shelves stretch upward into a starlit mist. Here, language is not merely a collection of sounds used to communicate, but a physical weight, a substance that occupies space. You walk through aisles labeled with the desires of men: prosperity, success, wealth, career. These sections are suffocating. The air is thick, gray, and cold. As you touch the books, they vibrate with the frantic, jagged energy of human desperation. They are heavy, bound in iron, and covered in the dust of centuries of failed intention. There is a paradox here that few ever pause to observe. The more fervently a man chases these concepts, the heavier the air becomes. When someone stands in the aisle of wealth and cries out for relief, the library does not provide. It merely presses back. Each word spoken in these aisles, words like money, target, goal, achievement, thuds against the floor like lead. They are burdened. They are stained with the ink of old failures, the scent of parental anxiety, and the sharp, metallic tang of survivalist fear. But look to the far end of the library, where the light changes. There, in a section almost invisible to the naked eye, is a single, radiant volume. It does not carry the weight of expectation. It does not demand. It simply is. It is a neutralizer. While the rest of the world screams its desires into the void, hoping to be heard, this code slips past the guardians of the subconscious, as if it were a spirit. It is the linguistic key that unlocks the heavy, rusted doors of the psyche, allowing the light of the infinite to pour through. It is not a weapon of force. It is a solvent of grace. To understand why the word wonderful functions as a spiritual neutralizer, one must first deconstruct the nature of the internal critic, that sentinel of the psyche tasked with maintaining the status quo. Why does the mind reject our standard affirmations? The brain is an analytical machine designed for pattern recognition based on historical data. When one declares, "I am becoming a millionaire," the brain immediately initiates a recursive scan. It cross-references the statement with the present reality, the bank statement, the credit score, the history of struggle. Finding a discrepancy, the brain labels the affirmation as a falsehood. Because the brain is programmed to value survival over ambition, it prioritizes the protection of the self-concept. It views the optimistic affirmation as a threat to its established reality. It creates cognitive dissonance, and in the war between conscious desire and subconscious belief, the subconscious, the architect of reality, almost always wins. How does wonderful bypass this defense? Wonderful is a category-defying descriptor. It is not a quantitative noun like money, or a status-laden term like career. It is a quality of spirit. Because it has no ceiling, the analytical mind cannot measure it. It cannot calculate the math of wonderful. When you apply this word to your work, your way, your service, and your pay, you are essentially introducing a substance into your psyche that carries no history of struggle. Think of it as a spiritual anesthetic. By labeling your reality as wonderful, you are not making a claim that your bank account is currently overflowing. You are making a claim about the nature of the experience itself. The subconscious mind, unable to find a conflict because wonderful is subjective and expansive, simply accepts the definition. It stops searching for the evidence of your past failures and begins to align with the new instruction. It creates a vacuum of how and why, and into that vacuum, the universe flows. You are no longer arguing with math. You are declaring a state of grace. You are shifting the vibration from transactional to transformational. In the early months of 1925, amidst the post-war austerity that gripped the hearts of many, a woman named Florence Scovel Shinn sat in a room that was anything but opulent. The world outside was obsessed with the mechanics of survival, the grind, the labor, the cold calculation of the economy. Florence, however, was obsessed with the mechanics of the divine. She had observed thousands of souls enter her study, carrying the heavy burdens of their wants and needs, only to leave exactly as they had arrived, bound by their own declarations of lack. Florence understood that the tongue was a magic wand, but she saw that most people were using theirs to curse their own horizon. They were saying, "I need money for the rent," effectively branding themselves with the mark of needing and rent. She began to experiment with a specific, 1-2 word decree. She didn't offer it as a prayer, for prayer often implied that God was distant and had to be coaxed, but as a spiritual technicality. She instructed a struggling artist, a man whose hands were shaking with the fear of poverty, to stop asking for clients or sales. Instead, she gave him the 12 words, "I have a wonderful work in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for wonderful pay." The artist was skeptical. "That is not practical," he argued. "The rent is due." Florence smiled. "The rent is a mathematical problem. You are trying to solve it with more math. Use the neutralizer. Wash the math away." The man began to speak the words, not with fervor, but with a quiet, persistent rhythm. At first, nothing happened. Then, the chaos began. The gallery he relied on closed down. His main patron moved away. He felt the fear clawing at his chest, the urge to return to his old, anxious petitions. But he remembered the instruction. The weeds must be pulled before the roses can grow. He held the decree. Within 3 weeks, he received a letter from a stranger in a city he had never visited. The stranger had seen a sketch of his from years prior and wanted to commission a series of works at 3 times his previous rate. The wonderful way had bypassed his own limited geography and his own limited connections. He hadn't fought for the money. He had neutralized the obstacle of his own doubt. The 12 words had collapsed time, bridging the gap between his talent and his prosperity with the precision of a master architect. The power of the neutralizer lies in its ability to strip away the how. When you release the need to know how your prosperity will arrive, you remove the primary barrier to its entry. You are the architect, and the universe is the builder. The builder does not care about your budget or your timing. The builder only cares about the clarity of the blueprint. Before we go further, look at the vocabulary you use daily. Do you speak of struggling to get by or trying to find a way? These phrases are anchors. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop anchoring your soul to the seabed of scarcity and start sailing toward your divine inheritance. You are currently standing at the edge of a great transition. You have learned that your words are not descriptions of your world, but the blueprints for its construction. We have identified the neutralizer, but we have yet to explore the square of fulfillment, the fourfold loop that keeps this energy circulating. In the next chapter, we shall walk the perimeter of this square. We will see how work, way, service, and pay lock together to form a system that cannot fail, provided you hold the key. The shadows of your old life are already beginning to stretch, signaling the approaching dawn of your new reality. Prepare yourself. We are about to lay the foundation of the square, and once the stone is set, there is no going back to the old, heavy ways of the world. Observe the dawn, not as a mere astronomical event, but as a silent, relentless mandate. A master architect stands upon the scaffolding of a nascent skyscraper, staring out over a fog-choked city. In his hands, he clutches a roll of vellum, the blueprint. The paper is light, almost translucent, fluttering in the morning breeze. It possesses no physical weight to speak of, yet it dictates the path of every steel beam, every gallon of concrete, and every laborer's movement for the next 3 years. There is a profound paradox in this act of creation. The building a titan of glass and stone, destined to pierce the clouds, is already complete. It exists in its entirety within the lines of the ink, yet it does not exist at all in the physical world. The architect does not shout at the ground. He does not beg the steel to rise. He does not struggle against gravity. He simply unfolds the blueprint. The builders, the cranes, and the mortar follow the lines with a blind, unquestioning obedience. Now, consider the observer in the world below, running toward their own destiny with lungs burning and heart racing. They are trying to build their life through exertion, sweating against the gravity of their circumstances, unaware that they are trying to construct a masterpiece without a blueprint. They have been drawing their reality on the wind, sketching designs of lack, fear, and hardship. They look at the towering structures of their own discontent, their debts, their stale relationships, their uninspired work, and they weep, wondering why the structure is so cold and forbidding. They do not realize that the universe, the great, silent builder, has simply followed the lines they have drawn. The universe is not a judge. It is a master mason. It does not argue with the architect. It merely executes the command. To master the architecture of one's own existence, one must descend into the metaphysics of the subconscious, the inner drafting table where every reality is first conceived. Why does the subconscious mind become an unintentional architect of disaster? The subconscious is inherently non-selective. It lacks the faculty of discernment between what is desired and what is feared. It registers only the frequency of the command. When a human habitually says, "I am so tired," or "I will never have enough," the subconscious perceives these not as complaints, but as specifications. Why does it do this? Because the subconscious is designed to validate the self-concept. If the internal narrative is one of exhaustion or scarcity, the subconscious must by its very nature curate experiences that provide evidence for that narrative. It seeks consistency above all else. How does one transition from unintentional drawer to conscious architect? One must engage in recursive thinking, which is the process of tracing a present reality back to its origin in the word. If the output is a life of struggle, one must recursively ask, what was the command that initiated this structure? By tracing the current building, the physical experience, back to the blueprint, the mental decree, one uncovers the hidden lines of fear and doubt that were drawn in the quiet, unguarded moments of the past. To redraw the blueprint, one cannot simply erase the old lines. One must overlay them with a new, authoritative, and non-resistant command. This is the law of non-resistance in action. Most attempt to fight their current reality, which only serves to solidify the existing architecture. Instead, the architect must draw a new, wonderful blueprint with such unwavering conviction that the subconscious mind is compelled to redirect its resources toward the new design. It is the shift from reactive struggle to proactive creation. By changing the blueprint, you are not forcing the world to change. You are forcing the world to reveal its hidden potential to match your new alignment. The universe cannot build a palace on a blueprint of a prison. You must first change the ink before the brickwork can shift. In a valley shielded by jagged peaks, two gardeners tended to plots of land that sat side by side. The first gardener, a man named Harkin, was known for his frantic energy. He was obsessed with the weeds that plagued his soil. Every morning, he stood at the edge of his plot, cursing the thistles, the dandelions, and the creeping vines that choked his progress. He spoke of nothing but the weeds. "They are everywhere," he would mutter, his voice thick with bitterness. "They are ruining my harvest." He spent his days in a state of perpetual combat, pulling, hacking, and burning, yet by the following sunrise, the weeds had returned, more numerous and more defiant than before. The second gardener, a woman named Elara, was rarely seen fighting the soil. She spent her mornings sitting in the center of her plot with a parchment and a quill, sketching out her vision for a garden of roses, lilies, and golden-petaled sunflowers. She did not ignore the weeds, but she did not give them the power of her voice. When she spoke of her land, she described the beauty that was to be. "Here," she would say, pointing to an empty stretch of dirt, "will be the fragrance of jasmine." There, the majesty of the rose. One season, a great drought descended upon the valley. Harkin's garden, built on the foundation of fighting the weeds, withered into dust. He had focused so intently on what he did not want that he had forgotten to plant what he did. His soil was exhausted from the internal war. Elara's garden, however, thrived. The roots of her flowers, nurtured by her consistent vision, had plunged deep into the cool, subterranean waters of the valley. She had not fought the drought. She had built a garden designed to seek the water. By sketching the blueprint of abundance, she had directed her actions toward the sustenance. She was not a victim of the environment. She was the architect of her own oasis. Harkin had been drawing a map of the desert, and the universe, ever faithful, had given him exactly what he asked for: sand. The transition from gardener to architect requires a radical change in how you handle your internal ledger. You have likely spent your entire life drawing blueprints of disaster, detailing every flaw and every limitation with meticulous precision. Today, you are given the ink to rewrite the draft. Before you continue this journey, identify one area of your life, your health, your finances, or your relationships that currently looks like a desert. Take a moment to write down, in your own words, the wonderful version of that area. Do not write what you hope for. Write what you claim. Like this post, if you are ready to burn your old blueprints of struggle and begin the first sketch of your divine design, you have begun to see the mechanics of your own creative power. You realize now that you are not a cog in a machine, but the architect of the machine itself. Yet, a blueprint is useless if the pillars do not support the weight of the structure. The square of fulfillment is the structural integrity that holds your reality together, and it is the very next secret we must unlock. We are approaching the heart of the mystery. You have the neutralizer, and you have the blueprint. Now, you must learn how to align the four pillars: work, way, service, and pay into a single, harmonious cycle. There is a square that exists in the fourth dimension, and once you step inside it, you are no longer the seeker of your own life. You are the center of it. The shadows of your old life are fading, for the light of the architect is beginning to burn bright. The next stage of our work will solidify the pillars. Do not miss a single line, for the structure you are about to build will last for an eternity. Observe the rhythmic respiration of the ocean against a jagged coastline. It is a perfect, ancient commerce. The sea gives itself to the shore in a surge of white foam, only to be drawn back by the gravity of the moon, gathering strength for the return. It is a cycle of inhalation and exhalation, an endless energetic exchange where nothing is held back and nothing is lost. In this vast, watery expanse, there is no hoarding, yet there is no lack. The ocean does not worry about the tide going out. It knows the tide will return, richer for the journey. Now, contrast this with the internal rhythm of the modern human. Observe the person standing in the crowded corridor of a city, clutching their chest as if protecting a hoard of gold. They are trying to inhale without exhaling. They are desperate to receive the pay, to receive the promotion, to receive the validation, but they have locked their hands in a tight, fearful fist. They believe that if they give out their service, their effort, their creative energy, they will be diminished. They live in a state of chronic, spiritual constipation, gasping for a breath that never comes because they have not yet learned how to release what is inside. There is a paradox in their posture. They are starving for the very thing they are blocking. They see the pay as a reward they must capture, not as the final, inevitable exhale of a cycle they have already initiated. They are trying to stand in the middle of a river and command the water to flow only into their cup, unaware that the river only flows when the path is clear. They have forgotten that they are not the reservoir, they are the channel. The square of fulfillment is the structural geometry of the soul's prosperity. It consists of four distinct energetic pillars: Wonderful work, wonderful way, wonderful service, and wonderful pay. To understand why most lives remain stagnant, one must recognize that they are missing at least one of these pillars, causing the square to collapse into a jagged, ineffective line. Why does the system fail when a pillar is neglected? Consider the causality of the square. Work is the anchor of purpose. Without a clearly defined wonderful work, a soul-deep expression of one's talents, the human spirit becomes a wandering ghost, drifting without a vessel. Way is the logistics of the infinite. When one tries to control the way, they introduce resistance, blocking the unseen routes of opportunity. Service is the catalyst. It is the output that justifies the harvest. Pay is the harvest itself, the inevitable material reflection of the spiritual contribution. How does recursive thinking reveal the breakdown? If one asks, why am I not seeing the wonderful pay? One must recursively look at the pillar of wonderful service. Why is the service not wonderful? Because the internal ledger is imbalanced. Most individuals feel a subconscious guilt for wanting to be paid well. They have been conditioned to believe that wealth is gained by taking, not by giving. This guilt acts as a psychic dam. They are not giving wonderful service because they are too busy calculating their own survival. They are not serving, they are performing a chore to earn a crust. To fix this, one must realize that the pay is not a payment for the labor, the sweat, and the grind. It is the magnetic return of the value, the service, and the love. The universe is a perfect accountant. If you provide wonderful service, service infused with integrity, love, and the signature of your own divinity, the wonderful pay is not a reward you beg for. It is the natural, balanced reflection of your own output. The ledger must be balanced. You cannot breathe out, serve, without the universe breathing in, supply, to fill the space you have cleared. The square is a closed loop. You are the one who closes it. In the annals of the high merchants of Oros, there lived a weaver named Kalin. Oros was a city obsessed with the mechanics of wealth, yet Kalin was the only merchant who never seemed to worry about the market's whims. While other merchants spent their days screaming in the bazaar, trying to force their wares upon travelers, Kalin sat in his workshop with a calm that bordered on the divine. Kalin understood the square of fulfillment before the term was ever coined. His wonderful work was not merely weaving. It was the act of weaving the stories of his customers into the fabric itself. When a traveler came to him for a cloak, Kalin did not just take their measure. He listened to their aspirations. He served them with a level of attention that turned the transaction into a ritual. He gave wonderful service. When the traveler asked for the price, Kalin would name a sum that was remarkably high, yet the customer never haggled. They felt that in paying him, they were not just buying a cloak, they were paying for the grace he had injected into their lives. Kalin's wonderful way was to leave the logistics of the materials to the divine. He never worried where his wool would come from, for he knew that the quality of his service drew the best suppliers to his door. One day, a rival merchant, desperate and hollow, approached Kalin. "I sell the same cloth as you," the rival said, his voice trembling with envy. "I work longer hours. I suffer more. Why do you have the gold, and I have only dust?" Kalin looked at the man's hands, which were clenched into fists. "You are trying to draw the square with only two sides," Kalin replied. "You have the work, but you have no love for the service. You are focused on the pay, so you have no space for the way. You are trying to fill a cup that you refuse to empty. You are not a channel. You are a dam. A dam can hold water for a moment, but it eventually breaks under the pressure. A channel, however, lasts for 1,000 years." The rival did not understand. He returned to his booth and continued to scream at the sky, his square broken, his ledger perpetually in the red, forever searching for a harvest in a field where he refused to plant the seeds of service. The square of fulfillment is not a destination, it is an orientation. It is the way you hold your body, the intention behind your words, and the energy you bring to the smallest tasks of your day. You are the architect, the mason, and the merchant of your own destiny. If you are lacking the harvest, look to your service. If you are feeling blocked, look to your way. Identify one moment today where you feel you are performing a chore rather than giving wonderful service. In that exact moment, pause. Reframe the task as a gift. Whisper, "I give wonderful service," and observe how your internal tension dissolves. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop being a dam of scarcity and start being a channel of infinite flow. You now possess the fourfold truth. You have the neutralizer, the blueprint, and the system of the square. Yet, there remains a shadow that haunts the most gifted of creators. The fear of the chemicalization, the period of chaos that often follows a radical shift in vibration. Many who have come this far have faltered because they mistook the clearing of the old rubble for the destruction of their dreams. In the next chapter, we will venture into the dark soil of the soul. We will discuss the chemicalization of reality, why your life may seem to fall apart just as it is beginning to bloom, and how to stand like a mountain while the debris of your old life is washed away. The bridge is behind you. The kingdom is ahead. Do not look back at the rubble. The roses are already pushing through the cracks. A man sits in the dim light of a kitchen, the digital glow of a smartphone illuminating his face like a pale, ghostly shroud. It is 6:00 a.m., yet his eyes are already heavy with the residue of 1,000 anxieties. He scrolls through the news feed of global catastrophes, economic warnings, and the polished, unattainable highlights of strangers' lives. With every swipe, his shoulders tense. With every headline, a fresh layer of not enough settles over his spirit. He is effectively in a trance, a deep, hypnotic state where his reality is being curated by the very systems he believes he is observing. He sighs, a sound of profound resignation, and mutters, "It's going to be another long day." In that singular whispered sentence, he has cast a die. He has issued a command. He has, with the power of his own throat, initiated the architecture of his own suffering. He believes he is a passive observer of a chaotic world, unaware that he is the primary author of his own misery. He stands like a man, screaming at the cold, wondering why the wind will not obey his demand for warmth, failing to notice that he is standing in an ice chamber of his own design. The paradox is absolute. He possesses the power of a creator, yet he uses it exclusively to dismantle his own peace. He is not broken. He is simply a master of the wrong magic. To wake from this trance, one must first confront the psychological mechanism of the autosuggestive loop. Human consciousness is an ever-active broadcasting station. It does not merely receive information. It is constantly transmitting frequencies that the physical world is compelled to match. Why does the mind succumb to this trance of negativity? The brain is evolutionarily hardwired for threat detection. In our ancestral past, survival depended on identifying the predator in the grass, not the beauty of the sunset. This negativity bias means that the subconscious mind is primed to scan for what is wrong. When the modern individual feeds this bias with a constant stream of external negativity, they are essentially training their own consciousness to become a radar for misfortune. They are recursively confirming that something always goes wrong. Why do they persist in this? Because the mind values the safety of the known, even if the known is painful. To expect failure is, in a distorted way, a form of control. It prevents the pain of disappointment. How do we break this, and how does the power of the spoken word intervene? The tongue is the steering wheel of the psyche. The wake-up call is the realization that you are not a victim of your circumstances, but a speaker of them. If one recursively examines the chain of events in their life, they will find that their dominant inner narratives, the complaints, the pessimistic predictions, the self-deprecating humor, are the literal scripts the universe follows. To break the trance, one must realize they have been practicing reverse manifestation for years. Every time they said, "I knew I wouldn't get that call," and the phone stayed silent, they were successfully manifesting their belief. The power is already mastered. The authority is already present. One does not need to learn how to manifest. One has been doing it flawlessly since birth. One only needs to learn how to stop manifesting what you do not want. The wake-up call is the shift from a trance state, where one speaks without intention, to a sovereign state, where one speaks with the full weight of divine authority. You are a creator who has been talking in your sleep. Now, the time has come to open your eyes and consciously, deliberately command the light. In the great archive of antiquity, there existed a device known as the voice-activated terminal of the infinite. It was a simple, polished stone pedestal in the center of the world, connected to the very fabric of space and time. Whoever stood before it and spoke with conviction would see their words manifested in the physical landscape of their life, within the passing of a season. For generations, the people of the world treated this pedestal as a curse. They stood before it in their darkest hours, weeping and shouting, "The world is cruel. I am destitute. Nothing ever works for me." And sure enough, the landscape around them would twist to reflect their words. The soil would dry, the gates of opportunity would lock, and the sky would turn gray. They would point to the landscape and scream, "Look how the world hates us." Then came a traveler, who had spent years in the high mountains, observing the silence of the stars. He approached the pedestal, and the people gathered around him, expecting him to join in their lamentations. Instead, the traveler took a deep breath, centered his spirit, and looked into the stone. He did not ask for the world to change. He did not beg for relief from his suffering. Instead, he spoke with the voice of a king. "I inhabit a world of abundance," he declared. "The gates are open, and the harvest is already prepared." The people laughed at him. "The soil is rock. The sky is parched. Your words are lies." But the traveler did not falter. He stood in the heat, speaking his truth into the stone, day after day, regardless of the dust in his eyes. And then, the shifting began. A hidden spring beneath a rock cracked the surface, pouring water into the parched earth. A merchant from a distant land, lost in the mountains, stumbled upon their village with goods that had been sitting unsold for years, desperate to trade them for the traveler's vision. The landscape was not changed by magic. It was changed by the traveler's refusal to accept the old reality as his own. He had simply changed the command, and the universe, ever the faithful servant, had rushed to fulfill it. The wake-up call is not a grand event. It is a quiet, internal pivot. It is the moment you realize that the power of the magic wand is held in your own tongue, and you have been using it to paint the walls of your own prison. You must begin today, in the smallest of ways, to reclaim your authority. Identify one phrase you repeat often that begins with "I am," or "I always," followed by a negative "stop." Replace it immediately with its opposite, a statement of your sovereignty. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop manifesting the past and commit to the discipline of the new, conscious decree. You have realized that you are a creator who has been sleeping on the job. You have acknowledged the power of the command, and you have seen the consequences of your unintentional scripts. But what happens when you begin to speak with this newfound authority? What happens when the universe, sensing your shift, begins to rearrange the furniture of your life? There is a secret gate of the morning, the first, most sacred instruction of the day that determines whether you remain in the trance or step into the light of the sovereign air. We have arrived at the threshold of the morning gate. This is not a suggestion. It is a tactical instruction for your soul. In the next chapter, we will learn how to set the blueprint of your entire day before you even lift your head from the pillow. You are waking up, and the world is already beginning to tremble at the sound of your voice. Stand tall, for the dawn is yours to command. The world sits in a state of suspended animation, the sky a bruised violet just before the sun breaches the horizon. In the stillness of this hour, there is a profound, almost terrifying potentiality. For the vast majority, this time is merely the prelude to the onslaught. The mind is already rushing toward the incoming tides of emails, notifications, and the crushing weight of must-dos. They wake up and immediately surrender their throne to the machinery of the world. They reach for their phones before they have even opened their eyes, allowing the collective anxiety of the species to dictate the frequency of their own existence. But consider the alternative, a singular moment of profound stillness before the world rushes in. The soft, porous space between sleep and wakefulness is the twilight threshold. Here, the conscious mind is disarmed, the defenses of the ego are lowered, and the subconscious is wide open, an unplowed field waiting for the first seeds of the day. Most people squander this window, letting the chaos of their past invade their future. They do not realize that in this twilight, they possess the power of a god. To rise from the bed in a rush is to become a servant to the clock. To remain in the stillness and set the decree is to become the master of the day. The paradox is that the most powerful act you can perform is the one that looks, to the undisciplined observer, like doing absolutely nothing at all. To master the morning gate, one must understand the neuroplasticity of the first waking moments. The brain, in its transition from delta and theta waves toward the beta state of alert cognition, is exceptionally malleable. Why does the morning mandate override the rest of the day? When you wake, your mind is a tabula rasa. By introducing the wonderful decree immediately, you are establishing the primary frequency for the day's events. If you begin by worrying about bills, you are setting a frequency of lack, and the brain, ever faithful to its pattern-matching nature, will spend the next 16 hours seeking out evidence to validate that lack. This is the priming effect. The first thought of the day acts as a steering gear, determining the trajectory of every subconscious decision you make until you return to sleep. How does one recursively command the morning? The morning gate ritual is not just an affirmation, it is a tactical contract. The recursive question is, how can I ensure the universe recognizes this command as authoritative rather than hopeful? The answer lies in the state of already have. When you speak the decree, I have a wonderful work in a wonderful way, you are not asking for something to come to you. You are acknowledging that in the quantum field, in the architecture of the infinite, the result is already achieved. The subconscious does not understand the difference between a vivid, deeply felt mental command and a physical reality. By speaking the decree 3 times with the golden light of intention, you are saturating your neural pathways with the certainty of abundance. You are bypassing the analytical sensor that is still groggy from sleep, planting the blueprint deep within the marrow of your identity. You are saying to the universe, this is the contract for the day. I accept nothing less. By doing this before the phone is touched, before the news is heard, and before the world tells you who you are, you maintain your sovereignty. You become the architect of the day, rather than its victim. Consider the life of Julian, a commander of a naval fleet in a time of unprecedented instability. History remembers Julian not for his tactical brilliance alone, but for a bizarre, unchanging ritual he performed every morning, regardless of whether his fleet was in a safe harbor or in the midst of a violent gale. While his officers were busy agonizing over the charts, checking the wind, velocity, and fretting over the state of the enemy's readiness, Julian would retire to his quarters long before the sun had risen. He would sit in absolute silence, staring at the dark horizon through his porthole. He would speak a set of words, a secret decree of his own design, not to his men, but to the ocean itself. He spoke of his fleet as if it were already victorious, describing the voyage as wonderful and the outcome as perfectly provided for. His junior officers often whispered that he had lost his grip, that he was ignoring the logistical nightmares that threatened to sink them. But Julian knew what they did not, that the logistical problems were merely the shadows of the blueprint. He spent those early hours setting the frequency, He knew that if he allowed the anxiety of the crew to become his own, he would be anchoring the entire fleet to the frequency of fear. The turning point came during the Great Tempest of the Silver Isles. Every other fleet in the region sought the safety of the bays, fearing the surge. Julian, acting on the command he had set in the silence of his morning gate, ordered his ships forward into the heart of the storm. It seemed like madness. Yet, as the fleet moved into the chaos, the wind shifted in a way that defied every meteorological record. A path opened, a calm, narrow corridor through the center of the hurricane that led them directly to their objective. Julian's men called it luck. Julian knew it was the law. He had set the blueprint in the morning, and the universe, unable to violate the structure he had laid, had moved the very winds to comply. The morning gate is the most vital piece of your daily architecture. You have spent years waking up to the demands of the world. Now, you must wake up to the demands of your own soul. You are a dignitary of the kingdom, and your morning routine must reflect that station. Starting tomorrow morning, you are tasked with the gate ritual. Before you touch your phone, before you check your emails, and before you allow a single thought of need to enter your mind, whisper the 1-2 word decree 3 times. Feel the light of the wonderful frequency washing over your bed. Like this message, if you commit to this sacred morning practice, signaling your transition from servant to sovereign, you have learned to guard the threshold of your consciousness. You have seen how the morning gate sets the trajectory for the entire day. But what happens when you step out of the bed and into the furnace of the workday? How do you maintain this frequency when the emails arrive, the tasks pile up, and the people around you are still operating in the trance of the grind? In the next chapter, we descend into the work gate. We will explore how to take the quiet power of your morning decree and infuse it into the very tasks that used to drain the marrow from your bones. You are about to learn how to turn the mundane into the miraculous, and your labor into a legacy. The gates are opening, and the path to the work gate is illuminated. Prepare yourself. The second act of your manifestation is about to begin. The mid-afternoon light filters through the blinds of a high-rise office, casting long, barred shadows across a mahogany desk. A woman sits motionless, her fingers hovering inches above a keyboard. The screen glows with the cold, blue light of a half-finished spreadsheet, a digital labyrinth of numbers that feel less like data and more like a cage. Outside, the city hums with the relentless, grinding sound of a million people performing tasks they despise, driven by the phantom necessity of the clock. In this moment, the air is stagnant. It is the atmosphere of the must-do. The woman feels a familiar, tightening sensation in her chest, the physiological footprint of resentment. She is caught in the great modern paradox. She is objectively productive, yet spiritually bankrupt. She believes that the work is a separate entity from her soul, a necessary evil to be endured until the bell rings. She views her labor as a toll she pays to the universe for the privilege of existence. But look closer at the grain of her reality. She is not merely typing. She is pouring her life force into a structure that she has fundamentally labeled as draining. She is a captive of her own perspective, unaware that the desk is not a cage, but an altar, and the spreadsheet is not a chore, but an instrument of manifestation. The room feels heavy because she has surrendered her sovereignty to the task, failing to see To traverse the work gate, one must perform a radical internal alchemy. Most individuals labor under the crushing delusion of labor vs. reward, believing that the work is the cost and the pay is the compensation. This is the root of the grind mentality. Why does this division cause spiritual stagnation? The division between who you are and what you do creates a state of fractured consciousness. When you resent your work, you are effectively warring against your own reality for 8 to 12 hours a day. The subconscious mind, which observes everything, records this dissonance. It concludes, "You hate what you do, therefore you hate your life." It cannot distinguish between the task and the person performing it. Consequently, the subconscious constricts. It limits your creativity, dulls your intuition, and ensures that the wonderful pay you seek remains locked behind a door that you are effectively guarding with your own resentment. How does one recursively invert this dynamic? One must apply the principle of the instrument of the divine. If you recursively ask, "Why am I here?" and move past the superficial answers of "for a salary" or "to survive," you arrive at the truth. You are here to leave the imprint of your consciousness upon the world. By reframing the task, whether it is sending an email, cleaning a room, or leading a board meeting as an act of wonderful service, you shift the energetic signature of the action. The mechanism is simple. You are not working to get something. You are working to give something. When you shift your focus from "I have to do this" to "I am an instrument expressing value," you break the back of lack. Lack cannot exist in a heart centered on contribution. As you infuse the wonderful frequency into the task, you are no longer a victim of a job. You are a dignitary of the kingdom. You are no longer trading hours for dollars. You are emitting a resonance that draws the corresponding abundance. The task remains the same, but the frequency of the task has been elevated from a chore to a sacred rite. In the ancient stonemasons' guilds of the Gothic era, there were 3 men tasked with carving the gargoyles for a cathedral that would not be completed for 2 centuries. A traveler, curious about the men's state of mind, approached the first mason. "What are you doing?" the traveler asked. The first mason wiped sweat from his brow, his face a map of frustration. "I am hacking away at this cursed, heavy stone. My back aches, my hands are bleeding, and I am wasting my life for a pittance." The traveler moved to the second mason. "And you? What are you doing?" The second mason looked up, his eyes weary but calm. "I am carving a gargoyle. It is difficult work, but it pays for the bread on my table and keeps my family fed." Finally, the traveler approached the third mason. The man was working with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic grace. Even though he was carving the same gray stone, he moved with the precision of a dancer. When asked the same question, the third mason smiled, a light in his eyes that seemed to come from another world. He replied softly. "I am helping to build a cathedral to the divine. I am creating beauty that will stand for 1,000 years. I am giving my best service to the light, so that all who walk beneath these arches will feel the majesty of the heavens." The third mason was not faster than the others, nor was his stone easier to carve. But the cathedral he was building was not just in the walls, it was in his spirit. He knew that his service was the conduit through which his prosperity was guaranteed. He was not a victim of the stone, he was the master of the craft. And, as history recorded, it was the third mason whose name and whose prosperity traversed the ages, while the others were forgotten, consumed by the very stone they resented. The work gate is the application of your divine design in the active hours of your life. It is the practice of intentionality. You are not a cog, you are a beacon. Every task you perform today is an opportunity to broadcast your frequency. Before you begin your next task today, be it an email, a phone call, or a physical chore, stop for 3 seconds. Close your eyes and whisper, "I give wonderful service." Feel the shift from a state of must-do to "I am." Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop being a victim of your daily labor and start being a dignitary of your own life. You have mastered the morning gate, and you are now activating the work gate. You are learning to bridge the gap between your inner vision and your outer reality. But there is a final, vital pillar to the square of fulfillment. We have spoken of the morning and the work, but what of the night? What happens to your blueprint when the sun sets and your conscious mind falls into the silence of sleep? There is an evening gate, a period of review that allows your subconscious to continue the work of creation while your physical body rests. Many neglect this gate, and in doing so, they leave their work vulnerable to the interference of the world's chaos. In the next chapter, we will unlock the secrets of the night, where your decrees are planted in the dark, fertile soil of the infinite, preparing the harvest for the coming dawn. The work is nearly complete, and the square is almost closed. Stand ready. The world descends into the velvet embrace of night, a profound stillness settling over the landscape like a heavy, protective mantle. In the dying light of the day, the frantic vibrations of the city, the screech of brakes, the hum of electricity, the urgent pulse of human ambition begin to recede into a subterranean silence. A man sits by his window, watching the stars ignite one by one. The chaos of the daylight hours, the accumulation of small frustrations, the unmet expectations, and the lingering echoes of conflict all float before him like dust motes caught in the last rays of the sun. Most people use this time to rehearse their failures. They lie in the dark, recounting the day's ledger of not enoughs, reviewing the conversations they lost and the opportunities they missed. They are effectively dragging the debris of the past into the sanctuary of the present. They treat the night as a waiting room for the next day's struggle, unaware that they are squandering the most fertile period of creation. They are the gardeners who, having spent the day fighting weeds, now spend the night weeping over the barren soil, failing to see that the darkness is not an absence of light, but the necessary womb for the seed. The paradox is that the very stillness they fear, the silence of the night, is the precise instrument the universe uses to organize the events of tomorrow. They are the architects of their own insomnia, building walls of worry when they should be laying the foundation of destiny. The evening gate is not a time for passive rest. It is a time for active architectural maintenance of the subconscious. When the conscious mind yields to sleep, the threshold between the subjective self and the infinite becomes fluid. Why does the review hold such absolute power over the subconscious? The subconscious is essentially a recording device that never stops. During sleep, it processes the final impressions of the day, the bookends of the mind. By performing a deliberate, strategic review before sleep, you are providing the subconscious with its last and most dominant instruction. If you drift off while ruminating on the day's stress, you are effectively telling the subconscious, "This is the quality of my life. Please manifest more of this." The subconscious, taking this as the blueprint, spends the nocturnal hours aligning your future events with the vibration of your final thoughts. How does one recursively command the night? To master the evening gate, one must employ the law of gratitude as a command. The recursive question here is, how do I ensure the subconscious accepts this new vision as a completed reality? By framing the review as a thank you to the infinite. When you say, "I thank the universe for my wonderful work, which is manifesting now," you are doing two things simultaneously. You are acknowledging the presence of the result "I have," and you are bypassing the analytical mind's resistance to time. The subconscious understands "thank you" as a signal of finality. It concludes that because you are grateful, the objective is already secured. You are no longer trying to get the work. You are in the process of enjoying its arrival. This creates a state of expectancy without anxiety. As you slip into sleep, your mind is not occupied with how the rent will be paid or how the promotion will come. It is occupied with the frequency of fulfillment. You are essentially setting the night shift of your soul to work on the blueprints you established in the morning. While you sleep, the infinite rearranges the social, professional, and environmental conditions of your life to match the decree you have placed in its care. In the shadowed kingdom of Athelgard, there lived a legendary scribe named Theobald, who was said to possess the power of night writing. Theobald was not a magician, but a man who had mastered the silence. While his peers were exhausted by the demands of the royal court, Theobald remained remarkably vibrant, his contributions to the kingdom's records always arriving with a clarity that seemed divine. It was rumored that Theobald spent his nights in a process he called the reaping, While others spent their evenings recounting their grievances against the king or the harshness of the weather, Theobald sat in his cell and practiced a singular, quiet ritual. He would take a blank roll of parchment and, in his mind, he would write a summary of the next day. He did not write what he feared. He wrote the wonderful outcomes of the day to come. He described the king's favor, the abundance of his resources, and the grace of his interactions. One night, a rival scribe broke into his quarters, hoping to find a hidden cache of dark spells or arcane formulas. He found nothing but a man sleeping with a smile on his face, his hands folded peacefully over his heart. The rival, frustrated and disillusioned, realized that there were no scrolls, no potions, no tricks. He went to Theobald the next morning and demanded, "What is your secret? I have worked as hard as you, yet my parchment remains dry, and my life remains a struggle." Theobald looked at the man and said, "You spend your nights fighting the ghosts of what happened, while I spend my nights inviting the truth of what is to come. You are busy protecting the past, and so you have no room for the future. I go to sleep in the house I have already built, and wake up to find the universe has finished the construction." The rival, obsessed with the physical world, could not grasp the metaphysical reality that the night was where the day was truly created. He continued his cycle of regret, forever chasing the sun, while Theobald walked through his days as if he were guided by an unseen, friendly hand, the hand of his own nocturnal decrees. The evening gate is your final opportunity to lock in the frequency of your day. It is the act of seeding the dark soil. You are not just going to bed. You are entering the workshop of the infinite. Tonight, as you lay your head down, do not review the day's shortcomings. Practice the review. Whisper, "I thank the universe for my wonderful work, which is manifesting now in a wonderful way." Feel the gratitude for the result, even if it is not yet visible. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop being a victim of your own nocturnal ruminations and start commanding the night shift of your soul. You have learned to set the morning gate, to navigate the work gate, and now to seal your intentions with the evening gate. You have built a complete, harmonic system of decree. But we must address the final barrier, the chemicalization. When you begin to speak with this authority, the world around you may seem, for a brief time, to grow loud, chaotic, or even resistant. People may walk away, doors may close, and the old foundations may crack. This is not a failure. It is the breaking of the old to make room for the new. In the next chapter, we will venture into the garden of chemicalization. We will learn why the crumbling of your old reality is the first, sure sign that your new blueprint is taking hold. You are on the verge of a structural collapse, but only of the things that were never meant to support your greatness. Prepare your heart, for the thorns are being cleared, and the roses of your wonderful work are already stirring beneath the soil. The transformation is absolute. The chaos is only the shedding of your former self. Observe the forest floor after the first heat of spring has touched the frozen earth. It is a spectacle of violence masquerading as growth. Beneath the surface, the dormant roots of ancient, suffocating ivy are being pushed aside by the stubborn, piercing tips of young flowers. The process is not delicate. It is an upheaval. The soil is churned, the debris of last year's rot is tossed aside, and the quiet equilibrium of the winter is shattered. To the uninitiated observer, the one who believes nature should be tidy, and still this is a disaster. It is a chaotic, messy undoing of the ground they thought was solid. The individual who has begun to practice the law of the decree often finds their life resembling this precise moment. They hold their 12 words, they guard their gates, and yet, instead of immediate serenity, they encounter discord. A long-standing relationship grows strained. A career path that seemed stable suddenly dissolves. Or a deep-seated anxiety surfaces with a ferocity that feels like a regression. They stand amidst the debris of their own life, trembling, and ask the paradox. If I am aligning with the divine, Why is my world falling apart? They mistake the breaking of the shell for the death of the seed. They do not realize that the disorder they witness is not the destruction of their dreams, but the violent, necessary rejection of everything that can no longer survive the height of their new frequency. The phenomenon of chemicalization is the unavoidable purging phase of spiritual transmutation. In alchemy, when a base metal is introduced to a powerful solvent, the initial reaction is one of turbulence. The impurities must be rendered to the surface to be discarded before the purity of the gold can be revealed. Why does the subconscious mind manifest this upheaval? The subconscious is a repository of inherited weight, the beliefs, fears, and structures we have carried from our earliest years. When you introduce a wonderful frequency into a container filled with the density of lack, you create a pressure differential. The new truth demands that the old falsehoods vacate the premises. The psyche cannot hold two contradictory blueprints simultaneously. Why does it manifest as external chaos? Because your inner reality is the master of your outer environment. When the inner tectonic plates shift, the outer landscape must quake to recalibrate. The upheaval is simply the physical world realigning itself to match your new internal command. How does one navigate this without falling back into the trance? Recursive thinking dictates that you must see the chaos not as a judgment, but as a confirmation. If you are experiencing a closing of a door, you must ask, why was this door closed? And answer, because it led to a room that did not contain the wonderful work. Chemicalization is the universe taking out the trash. When you declare that you have wonderful work in a wonderful way, the universe acts as a master landscaper. It pulls the weeds, the people, the habits, and the dead-end opportunities that you have been too afraid to remove yourself. The how of this process is often uncomfortable, but the why is profoundly merciful. The universe is not punishing you. It is clearing the site for the structure you have ordered. To survive the chemicalization, one must learn to stand still in the eye of the storm. You must realize that when a person leaves your life, they were never part of the wonderful way. When a project fails, it was never part of the wonderful work. You are not losing your life. You are losing the weight that kept you from rising into it. In the valley of Oakhaven, there lived an elderly master who was famous for his roses. People traveled from across the continent to see them, for they were said to bloom with a color so vibrant it could be seen from miles away. One day, a young student approached the master, weeping. The student had just begun to cultivate his own garden using the master's techniques, but he was horrified. "Master," the student cried, "I followed your instructions. I held the vision. But look, my soil is churning, my old vines are turning black, and the earth looks like a battlefield. I have failed. I must have done something wrong." The master led the student to his own garden. He pointed to a patch of dirt where nothing grew but coarse, jagged weeds. "Look here," the master said. "Last week, this was a beautiful, manicured lawn of decorative grass. I dug it up, I burned the lawn, I turned the soil over until it was raw and exposed." The student was bewildered. "But why? You destroyed the beauty." "I destroyed the beauty of the grass," the master replied, "so that I could plant the seeds of the mountain lilies." The grass and the lilies cannot share the same root system. The grass is easy, pleasant, and shallow. The lilies are deep, complex, and require the entire strength of the soil. To grow the lilies, I had to be willing to witness the destruction of the lawn. The master placed a hand on the student's shoulder. "The chaos you see is not the end of your garden, it is the end of your lawn. You are currently in the middle of the digging. You are witnessing the removal of everything that is not a lily. Do not weep for the weeds you are pulling. Celebrate them. Every weed pulled is a space made for a bloom. The roses are already coming. You are just currently standing in the mud of the planting." The student returned home. And instead of fearing the upheaval, he began to welcome it. watching with fascination as his old life was cleared away, piece by piece, to make room for the majesty that was rising to meet him. Chemicalization is the signature of a soul in motion. If your life were not changing, you would be stagnant. If your life is in turmoil, you are being refined. Is there a situation in your life right now that feels like it is falling apart? Look at that situation not as a catastrophe, but as a clearing of the ground. Name the weed you are finally ready to release. Like this message to declare that you are no longer afraid of the upheaval, but are ready for the bloom. You now understand that the chaos is a witness to your decree. You are no longer frightened by the breaking of the old, you are empowered by it. But we must conclude this journey by anchoring you in the final, most potent secret of the decree, the difference between wanting and having. Many people spend their lives in the I want frequency of separation and lack. But the true heir to the infinite does not want. They acknowledge. In our final chapter, we will discuss the transition from the seeker to the sovereign. We will explore how to adopt the identity of the heir, and how to inhabit the I have frequency that collapses all time and space between you and your prosperity. You are ready to stop being a seeker of the truth and start being the center of it. The garden is clear, the soil is turned, and the seeds are set. We are going to close the circle, and in doing so, we will reveal the kingdom that was yours before the world began. Imagine a grand, golden-lit hall of mirrors, extending into an infinite horizon. A person walks through this hall, clad in the dusty, threadbare garments of a traveler. They move with a hurried gait, their eyes darting from side to side, forever searching for a door, a key, or a map that might lead them to the kingdom of abundance they have heard whispered about in legends. They are clutching a small, tarnished coin, the sum total of their perceived worth, and they are begging the heir, "Where is it? Where is the wealth? Where is the life I was promised?" The paradox is agonizingly clear to the invisible observer. As the traveler walks, the mirrors reflect not just their threadbare clothes, but the majesty of the palace they are already walking through. The ceiling is painted with the history of the stars, the floor is inlaid with marble from mountains yet to be discovered, and the very air is thick with the scent of possibility. The traveler is not outside the kingdom looking in. They are at the very heart of the throne room. Yet they are so consumed by the search by the identity of the seeker that they are blind to the fact that the palace is their own. They believe they must work to earn their entry, unaware that their presence here is their birthright. They are an heir, shivering in the cold, because they have forgotten how to stop being a beggar and start being the one who owns the estate. The ultimate shift in the architecture of manifestation is the movement from the I want frequency to the I have frequency. This is not a shift of logic, but a shift of identity. Why does the identity of the seeker prevent the fulfillment of the decree? The seeker identity is inherently tethered to the belief that the prize is separate from the self. When you claim to be seeking success, you are reinforcing the subconscious belief that success is out there and you are in here. This creates a temporal gap, a distance that the mind must bridge through effort. Every moment spent seeking is a moment spent confirming the absence of the object. It is a closed loop of lack. Why do we cling to this? Because it is safe. To acknowledge that you already have requires a level of radical responsibility that the ego finds terrifying. If you already have it, then why isn't it manifest? The ego prefers the comfort of the journey to the challenge of the throne. How does recursive thinking collapse this distance? One must recursively examine the nature of time. If you ask, where does the future exist? The answer is, only in your imagination. If you ask, where does the past exist? The answer is, only in your memory. The only place where life is actually occurring is in the now. By using the language of I have, you are aligning your conscious mind with the eternal now. You are not waiting for the universe to build the house. You are stepping into the house that has always existed in the mind of the divine. The mechanism of I have is the language of the fourth dimension. In the infinite, there is no sequence. All things exist as potential. And your decree is the act of selection. When you say, I have a wonderful work, you are not describing a future event. You are selecting a reality that is already vibrating in the quantum field. You are not a petitioner asking a favor of a distant authority. You are an heir, acknowledging an inheritance that was set aside for you before the foundation of the world. This is the end of the struggle. This is the moment the seeker dissolves and the sovereign appears. In the kingdom of Solara, there was a prince who was kidnapped in his infancy and raised by a band of wandering nomads. He grew up in the desert, believing himself to be nothing more than a dust-covered shepherd. He spent his youth starving, searching for scraps of food, and shivering under the harsh winds of the dunes. He often dreamt of a grand palace with golden domes, but he dismissed these visions as the fever dreams of a peasant. One day, a royal envoy from the palace arrived in the desert, bearing a scroll. The envoy did not offer the boy a job. He did not offer him a wage. He did not offer to teach him how to be a king. Instead, the envoy knelt before the boy and said, "Your Majesty, the throne has been waiting for your return." The boy laughed. "I am a shepherd. I own nothing but this threadbare cloak." The envoy shook his head and handed him a mirror, the same mirror the boy had seen in his dreams. "You are not a shepherd who has come to claim a throne. You are a king who has been suffering from a lapse of memory. The palace is not your reward for surviving the desert. The desert was merely the training ground for your rule. You do not need to earn your crown. You only need to remember who you are." The moment the boy accepted his identity as the prince, the desert ceased to be a place of suffering and became his territory. He did not have to work to become the king. He simply had to be the king. He walked into the palace, not as an intruder seeking entry, but as the master returning to his own home. He realized then that all the seeking he had done in the desert was the very thing that had kept him from his inheritance. He had spent his life begging for bread when he was the one who owned the grain. You have walked the 10 chapters of this architecture. You have learned the neutralizer, the blueprint, the square, the morning, the work, the evening, the chemicalization, and finally, the identity of the air. You are no longer a person of the world, subject to its scarcity. You are a sovereign of the spirit, subject only to the laws of your own decree. This is the conclusion of our initial journey, but it is the inception of your reign. Go to the comments section and stake your claim. Write, "I have a wonderful work in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for wonderful pay." Do not write this as a wish. Write it as a royal proclamation, a signature upon your new reality. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to stop being a seeker and are now stepping onto the throne of your own life. The air is clear now, the path behind you is gone, and the kingdom ahead is yours. You have the keys, the maps, and the crown. There is nothing left to do in the old way, but there is an entire eternity of being to explore. Walk in peace, beloved, for the law is fulfilled. The words are spoken. The shift is not coming. The shift is. Your work, your beautiful, soul-deep work, is only just beginning. Go now and rule over the landscape of your life with the grace of one who knows that the table was set for you before you even arrived. The manuscript of your old life is closed. The book of the sovereign is open. What will you write on the first page?